Jesus has the authority over this world to forgive sin, to heal disease, to break the power of sin and death. And we work under his authority. Matthew chapter 10, we continue our series through Matthew, and we're moving to wrap up a section in the next couple of weeks, but we're in the teaching part of this second section of Matthew. So we've been looking at Matthew chapter 8. It says through 11, just because technically if you go with the commentaries, they say 11 verse 1 is part of this section. So really 8 through 10 and a little bit of 11. And this whole section has been concerned with the authority of Jesus and faith's response to the authority of Jesus. So we've talked the whole section, the faith of the lowly. On the one hand, we've had this picture of Jesus in his power and authority, revealing himself to be God in the flesh. Power over sin, over demonic powers, over all of created nature. And yet hanging out with lepers, Gentiles, prostitutes, tax collectors. And so we see God in undiminished authority and glory, compassionately engaging the broken, the hurting, the sinful, the lost. And so we've said this biblical faith submits itself to the authority of Jesus and rests in his compassion. And I know I'm repeating it every week because I want that seared into your head. We want to be a people who do not diminish the glory, the holiness, the wonder of Jesus. He is high and lifted up. And yet, in our passion for his holiness, we don't lose one bit of his compassion. That we don't reduce Jesus to go easy on people. We don't major on compassion and wash away the truth. That we see in our Lord this model of his authority and his compassion. We can rest in his compassion while submitting to his authority. This week's section, as we cross over into chapter 10 and look at verses 5 through 15, we will talk about disciples. That's been weaved through the whole section. Jesus will do some authoritative things, and then he'll call some disciples. Do some more authoritative things, call some disciples. That's been how the narrative section has gone. And now, in the teaching part of these 3 chapters, he is sending his disciples out on a short-term mission trip. And so we're going to see the mission of the disciple. And this is short and sweet, but there's a lot here. Jesus sends us to take his message on his mission in his power. We're talking about being Christ-shaped, Christ-defined, and Christ-sent. So let's look at the text, let's put it in its context and move through it. We'll hit some textual issues and then we'll take away some teaching points. So here's our outline of Matthew we've been looking at. I've zoomed in on it many times. I won't do that today, so you can go back to other sermon recordings if you want to see it up close. But we basically just said there's a flow of narrative and then teaching, where there'll be a larger chunk of Jesus' teaching paired with a chunk of him doing stuff. And so we are in book 2, which is the second chunk of narrative. And all along the way, we've said we'll look at Jesus' example and how he makes disciples. This section here has had a unique emphasis on disciples with the frequent callings of disciples and now the sending out of disciples. And so there are about 12 observations my goal is to put together as we go through Matthew to help you get a picture of what Christ-shaped discipleship looks like. And this week, more than some of the others, that's going to take a bit of a front seat because this passage is Jesus talking only to his disciples. He calls the 12, and this is what he says to them to send them out. And this is about them going out and taking on the ministry. This is a big juncture and transition for them. And so this is their response to the authority of Jesus. We even noted just in the flow of the text as a whole, we had the calling the disciples back in chapter 4. We had a summary of Jesus' ministry, verse 23 of chapter 4. We've had this whole chunk, which has looked at Jesus' both teaching and ministry of the gospel of the kingdom. And now we've had an almost verbatim repeat of that summary in 9:35. But now, rather than calling the disciples in, we're sending the disciples out. So just in the flow of the book, I want you to see, if you wanted to jump in and get a glimpse of Jesus shaping his disciples, this is a really good spot. And so that's why we want to slow up a little bit here and chew on that for us as a church. So we've had our two sections on narrative. We're on the third part of book 2, which is Jesus' sending sermon. So that sermon itself, we're not going to cover the whole sermon today. It breaks down into about 5 pieces, and I'm still wrestling with whether I can get away with combining any of these pieces, or if this is going to be, 5 sermons on Jesus' one sermon, which would still be faster than we did his last sermon. And part of it is, it feels like it jumps around. The first chunk, what we're doing today, is the one that fits the most. It's just talking about what's in the present, what they're about to do, and how he's sending them out. And then in verses 16 through 25, he starts talking about things that we're pretty sure don't happen until we get over to the book of Acts. It's not totally clear, and so you're kind of struggling where we're at. And then we get further in, and he makes some references to mysteries being revealed and persecution, and you're going, well, now this almost sounds like end time stuff. And then at the end, he just zooms out and makes these big picture statements about anybody who's going to follow Jesus. This is what's going to happen. This is how they're going to treat you. And this is your hope, and there's a reward. That's got very timeless quality. What's happening here is what happens often in Jesus' teaching. At first you're like, well, that we started, and then did we run off the rails, or what are you doing, Jesus? Why would you, in sending these guys out on their little short-term mission trip, talk about the birth of the church and the spread to the Gentiles? And why would you talk about the coming judgment and the revelation of all things and justice and ultimate reward? Well, because what Jesus is doing is he's taking their mission trip, their little short-term gig, and he's helping them understand it in light of the bigger picture. This is not just a one-off random, hey, let's have some fun. We had some downtime. Take a trip, guys. He wants them to see what they're doing as framed as them joining in what God has already been doing and what God is doing through Jesus. Their short-term trip is not a short-term. It's just a piece of the big term. That whatever we do, we want to be joining Jesus in his long-term mission. And that's why even in our short-term endeavors, we want to be thinking about where things are going. What has God promised he is going to be doing? Because I'm moving in that direction when I move in submission to him. And so my short-term trips are joining Jesus on his mission. And so he takes them on their first send-out, and he frames their trip in light of his entire ministry across time. That's why you start with something present, and then you start getting big picture and references to all across the history. Is he saying, you're part of this. I didn't just call you to watch. You are going to step into what I'm doing and be part of this big story of how I am saving the world and how I bring the good news of the kingdom to the world. Your trip is part of that. I think that alone, you could do a whole sermon right there about living our lives in reference to Jesus' big mission and living as part of that mission, not doing our own thing. And we sort of will, but I want to just stay in verses 5 through 15 for this week and chew on some of the stuff that's here. So let me first read the section. I'm going to start at verse 1 just to give you the lead-in and keep you in context, but we're going to focus on 5 through 15. So when he called to him his 12 disciples, he gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out, to heal every disease and every affliction. The names of the 12 apostles were these. First, Simon, who's called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. And I'll just pause here and note, you notice how he's got them in little couplings of 2. Mark says he sent them out 2 by 2. Matthew doesn't say he sent them 2 by 2, but he lists them 2 by 2 and kind of tells you who the 2s were. So then we get to him. Here's his sending orders to this group. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, "Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, give without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. In whatever town or village you enter, Find out who is worthy in it and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it's not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave the house or town. Truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. All right, let's I want to get the big picture, but there's a bunch of little kind of tangly things in there, and I want to make it clear for you what the text is saying, and then we'll pull out of it the big picture. So first off, there's this whole thing of like, he just first ordered, don't go to the Gentiles, don't go to the Samaritans, only go to the lost sheep of Samaria. Now, if you were reading through the whole chapter, though, this gets weird because he opens with, don't go to the Gentiles, and then like by verse 18, he's like, and so that'll be a witness to the Gentiles. You're like, are we going to them or are we not going to the Gentiles, Jesus? And if you know where the book ends, we're definitely going to go to the Gentiles eventually. What's with this don't go, but we do want them to hear, and not right now, but maybe later? I think this is weird for us, probably because most of you are Gentiles. And we do most of our evangelism in a Gentile-dominant context. But if you walk through the book of Acts, you look at the early church, they understood this idea that the gospel comes to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. That God had called the Jewish people to be holders of the oracles of God. And so you come to them and say, hey, that stuff you've been holding on to, he's come. He's here. And if they hear you, that becomes base of operation. That becomes the church in that town that takes the gospel to everybody in the town. And so it wasn't Jewish people better than Gentiles or something like that. It was more going, if we're joining God on his mission, God has raised up Israel to be a light to the nations, so we are going to try that light switch first. Because Jewish people of faith will accept the Messiah, and the light goes on. And you have people who've been raised in the truth, ready to mobilize and reach a town. But if you walk into that synagogue and there is rebellion, there are people who have twisted the truth into legalism and are not waiting for the Messiah, but are trusting in their own righteousness, then you go to the Gentiles. And you skip the Jewish people in the town. And you see Paul do that model, town after town after town. And so that's even how he shares the gospel in Romans. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. The power is for everyone and to everyone. But we recognize that God has a mission that comes through Israel and out to the world. And since we're joining him on his mission, we roll his way. And so Jesus grabs his disciples and he wants them to see, right now we're at the spot where we're taking the gospel of the kingdom to the Jews in the hopes that they will hear it and believe. But there's no intention for it to only stay here. And so even here in this short-term trip, which as far as we know, these guys will stay entirely within Israel's borders and probably witness exclusively in this trip to Jewish people. He's even in his marching orders saying, but you will eventually be drugged before governors and kings and rulers, and you will witness to the Gentiles. So even in the phase where we're preaching to those Jewish people, we preach to them with a mind that God's heart is for the whole world, and that God's gospel will go to the whole world. And so he doesn't leave that out, even while he puts them where they at, to join him where he's at in the flow of the mission. So textually, don't take that as picking sides or even a favoritism. It fits with what we've seen of the gospel throughout the New Testament. God has called a people and uses them. We join him in his program. The other piece that's maybe tangling here, takes up a big chunk of it, is this whole pay, no pay, goods. He opens and says, don't take any pay. You've received freely, you give without pay. And he even goes, but then he has this whole bit about, but go to towns where someone will host you. And that clearly is about being cared for, because a workman's worth is higher, he says. So don't be paid, but you're worth it. And if they won't host you and care for you, don't go. So we want pay, but we don't want pay. And by the way, don't take anything with you. And you're like, so now what's this? Now this again is a passage that is not left alone in the scriptures. Paul revisits this more than once in 1 Corinthians, in Philippians. And we have examples of how Paul administers this throughout Acts. The heart of this is twofold, but I think the root of it is this. A minister should be supported. The basic biblical principle is to presume the default situation is that ministers are supported by the community of believers. And there's a couple reasons for this. One of them is, when the minister is supported, then the service is free. See, take our context. If the church wasn't supporting me in some means and providing for my livelihood, then are we going to have tickets at the door? Come to Christ House, evening service, $5. Family discount, 25% off. Communion costs extra. Or in their context, come for the preaching, one fish. If you want a demon cast out, bring bread. And he says, no, we don't charge for that. What we do, the ministry, is free. It's a picture of God's grace. And so we're not coming out with a billing scheme, and we're not doing it as a business. And the way we make sure that happens is we expect the people of faith to take care of the ministers so the ministers don't have to charge. So you come to a town and you find somebody who's worthy, somebody whose heart is there, a person of faith who will receive you into their home. And if they will receive you and support you, you do ministry in that town. As long as you have people of faith who are willing to provide for you, then you can stay there. So don't take pay, but don't stay if they won't host. It's not a ban on them having means. It's a reminder that they are going to be ministers to a community, and it's going to be a teamwork. These are not going to be solo missionaries. They're not sent out alone, and they won't go to a town and work alone. They will partner with where God's already at work in that town, with people who have a heart to see it happen and are ushering in and inviting that kingdom work. So the heart of this is a supported ministry. It's a call for ministers to be supported by those they serve. And so I said this, don't make a business of it. But it also says you're not going to finance yourself. Don't take a bunch of gold in your belt. Like, well, if I'm not going to charge, I'll just bankroll myself. And he says, nope, leave the gold behind. You're going to go where people receive you, and if they won't receive you, leave that town. This pushes us to work as the people of God together. No solo Christians. And it also forces you to be directed by God. You're going to see doors open and doors close. The way he describes this, the logic is here in this passage, but he gets explicit in Corinthians and Philippians, is the idea that a minister has a right to be cared for. And I think a right is the word to catch and make sense of all the scripture here. Because there are other places where he'll say, let's not do that thing. Just because you have a right for something doesn't mean you have to do it, right? I have a right to remain silent when I get arrested. But I can talk all I want, and it'll be used against me in a court of law, right? So a right doesn't mean press the button every time. It means you have a right to it. And oftentimes, there are reasons why you don't use your rights. In fact, many times as Christians, we lay our rights down. So later, even in Luke, Jesus will say, okay, last time I said no bags, but this time I say, if you have bags, sell your goods and buy a sword. And it's in the context of saying you're about to be persecuted. And so in light of where we're at now, I want you to understand to get ready. Nobody's going to accept you. Everybody's going to come against you. Grab your swords, boys. Whereas here he's saying, we're going out to bring the gospel. Remember, the context of chapter 9 was we looked at masses of people who are hungry, like sheep without a shepherd. And Jesus says, I'm sending shepherds. So go and look for those who are ready to receive a shepherd. They want it. They're waiting for it. Go and minister to those people. They're waiting. And this mission trip is an answer to that crisis. So go where that field is ripe and have that harvest. That's what this trip's for. And where that harvest isn't ripe and the people don't want a shepherd, keep moving. And so in this context, them going and expecting their rights as pastors and ministers guides them to people who want a pastor and a minister. It keeps them on track with Jesus' mission. And that would be the normal default way ministry is done. Paul will say in 1 Corinthians 9, do I not have a right as an apostle? He says to bring a believing wife, which he doesn't even have one, so he's clearly talking about just principles they follow in the church, and to be housed and to be fed. And he cites the Old Testament and he cites Jesus. It says a workman's worthy of his hire. And so the idea here is that there's a right, and we do this because it guards the heart of the ministry so that ministry is done free. We care for these guys so they work free. But even as Paul's sharing that logic, he's sharing it in the context of a place where he didn't require it. He gets to Corinth, and he makes tents. And he has to point this out to Corinth because it apparently was not the default way it works. Normally he goes and stays in houses. We see him staying in the houses of rulers of synagogues who believe even when the people in the synagogue don't. Prisoners, jailers' houses. There's always people, Lydia, who open their houses to him, and he finds that worthy home, and he starts preaching the gospel in that town, supported by the patronage of those who believe. But he gets to Corinth, and in Corinth he didn't. He built tents, and so he writes to the Corinthians, and he points out, I do have that right, but I laid that right down. I surrendered it for the sake of the gospel. I felt that this was what God was asking me in this town to do, and so I could lay that down. I didn't have to go without pay. I chose to go without pay. And this idea that he wasn't requiring it, he felt like helped in a lot of ways in helping people get past some obstacles, get past some bad assumptions. And the Philippians even says, I didn't require you guys to support me. When I left Philippi, you guys chose to keep sending support. And I love that it was done voluntary, not because I had a right or an obligation I was holding over you. I just wanted to see your voluntary heart, that you saw the work of the gospel and you said, man, we want to partner in that. And he says, that's fruit to your credit in Philippians 4. So the idea here is, yes, you should support guys doing ministry work so they can provide the ministry for free, because we don't want anyone ever being charged for miracles and gospel. And we should expect that a community that believes this is God's mission gets on board in different ways, and some will give financially, some will give housing, some will give food, some will preach, some will serve, some will lay hands on. But we come together and we all make it happen, and we own it on our own shoulders as we join Jesus in that mission. That's the heart of it. So the default here, that he's the reason you have this back and forth in Jesus' own words. Don't take anything, but you are worth your hire, is Jesus is upholding that ministry approach that says, I expect these folks to receive you and to care for you. And I want to teach you not to go on your own, but to depend on the people of God. This is one that hits me personally, because my early ministry work, I always financed myself. I've always had side gigs and different jobs. I'm not afraid of work, getting dirty, and I'm cheap as all get out. So when I got a heart to be called into ministry, I was probably one of the few teenagers who had a fairly active savings account. Because when I would work, I delighted in putting it into savings. That made my day. And so my first 2 mission trips, I paid entirely on my own, out of pocket, with money that I just had in the bank. And in one sense, that was great. I just saw an opportunity and went. On the other hand, most of my community didn't even know I went on a trip. Nobody in my church really was told or given notice. I wasn't asking them to pray for me or join with me in any way. I paid for my trip, I left. They can find out when I get back. I remember being on mission trips and other kids are getting letters from their youth groups and things like that. I didn't get any correspondence. But I didn't ask for any, I didn't tell anybody. That's not, it would be really messed up if I said, how dare they not do the thing I didn't tell them anything about. When I launched into ministry, I was very, very proud to not ask for any pay or any support. I often refused to ask for support and would try and find my own ways. And I would burn myself out ragged, working as many side jobs, as many hours as I could. And I remember at one point someone had been asking me about whether there was ways to support our ministry, and I basically said no, because there wasn't. Hadn't set any mechanism up. And like I say, my heart's default position on that was I was proud of that. But then God's Spirit was not on the same page as me. And I remember praying, and it was bothering me that I was turning down folks who wanted to partner. And the conviction that hit me was in a sense this, that this was the words, you're a pig. You have found a beautiful way to serve the Lord, and you hog it all for yourself. You don't let anyone else in on this. You are loving serving God here. You're seeing great things here, and you keep it all to yourself. And here are other people in God's family that want to be a part, and you won't let them. And I just was deeply convicted that what I thought was this badge of pride was honestly a failure to embrace the concept of church. That I was adopted into a spiritual family. I'm not on my own. And I'm not some super Christian. I'm just part of the body, supposed to do my part with the body. And this exclusivist, I'll do it myself, I'll handle everything, maybe not part of the body, but maybe trying to be the whole body. It was bad for me, it was bad for the witness, but it was also bad for a ton of Christians who God gave a role, and I wouldn't let them function in their gifts. That's where it hit home, is that it wasn't about me being proud or avoiding reproach. It was really about me not letting other Christians use their gifts. And so Jesus says, no, I'm going to send you out, but I don't want you to think this is a one-man show. I'm going to take everything away from you, and I'm going to chuck you into these towns in total dependence that there are going to be people of faith there who will join you on this mission. Remember, this is their first send-out, and he said, I'm going to make you fishers of men. This is a training exercise, and Jesus wants to teach his ministers to depend on his people. And so he forces them to utter dependence. He says, no, you're not taking nothing with you, even though you are worth your hire. You go out and you trust that I have a body and that I will support you through that body. And so that's what's going on here textually with the don't take these certain items, but do expect to be paid. And if you're not received, go. Because we work as a body. We don't work alone. And if I have to work alone, unless I think God is calling me in some exceptional way, I don't stay. And so even the example we have, again, I've given the backdrop, people always use Paul as a contrast to this. When Paul arrives in Corinth, the reason he stays in Corinth is he was received into a home. Priscilla and Aquila live in Corinth. They are believers. And they're tent makers. And he says because they were tent makers, he went and stayed with them. So he is being received by believing people. And arguably, he is being supported. They said, here's our business. Come join us. You can just work right in our place. And even then, it looks like he's going to leave. And a few verses later, God comes to him in a vision and says, don't be afraid to stay in this city. Even though they're opposing you and persecuting you, I have many in this city. So stay and preach. The principle was he stayed because God said, no, I know it doesn't look like I've got people here because you're not seeing the response you should, but I do. And he still didn't go to a place where he didn't have a home open to him, to fellowship and partner. It wasn't Paul on his own in Corinth. It was Paul, Priscilla, and Aquila doing the tent-making mission. So this idea of solo ministry, do it myself, is not the norm in Scripture. The few places where we see it happen, we get an exceptional revelation of God confirming them that despite their reservations, they should go for it. And we have him writing back to the church saying, don't think that was normal. Pay your other pastors. They deserve it. So the default way that mission should be done is we as a church go on mission together, and a couple of us might go places. We've had missionaries come through here to raise support. You will have more. Different ones of you have short and long-term opportunities to go and serve in different places. I don't want you going alone. I hope we'll go with you. In part, by financing it. In part, by praying alongside you now and ahead of you. Because we work as a body to join Jesus in his mission. So he doesn't send them out alone, and he doesn't send them out to work alone. He creates a mission of dependence because in the body life, we join Jesus in his mission. So textually, this is some of the stuff I see going on. And that's why we have some of these tangly passages, is it's setting up the way Jesus sends out disciples and the way he's framing this mission. Now, I don't want to spend all day on that, and there's a few other things we could hit. If you have questions, snag me later. But here's, on the whole, what I want you to catch. The reason I backed up to verse 1 is when you take verse 1 through verse 15, everything he's commanding them to do, Jesus has done. Jesus didn't leave with a money bag or means. He's gone and God has provided. They get hungry, he says, ask them what they got. They got food, bring it up. Let's do this. They're trusting him. He tells guys, I don't have anywhere to lay my head. He wins Matthew over. He goes to Matthew's house. And for the rest of chapter 9, Matthew's house was the mission hub in the region, with lepers and blind guys coming into his house and getting healed, and people coming to get Jesus to bring him others, and he just comes back to the house, and there's all kinds of people there in the evening making the Pharisees uncomfortable. This is how Jesus has done it. And he says, don't do anything different. Even the list of miracles given here are all the miracles we literally just saw Jesus do in the last 2 chapters. He's cast out demons. He's healed lepers, all manner of disease. And so he says, I'm going to give you authority to do exactly what you've seen me do. You do the same. So their mission was defined by Jesus. We seek to represent Jesus wherever we go. If we're joining Jesus on mission, we don't just do whatever we want. And hear me, I'm a creative type. I like to mime and do graphic design. But we start with saying, who is Jesus? And how do I represent Jesus? That's my mission. What has he done? And can I do that in my context and my way? But my goal is just to let you see another glimpse of Jesus. You shouldn't go, wow, I met Tim. Wow, I met Joe. They should be like, it sure looked like Joe, but I met Jesus. In the context where Joe was hanging out. Because we want to just do what he did. And so we want to watch him up close, and then we want to get our hands into what he does so that Jesus defines us. That we get a hands-on, practical knowledge of Jesus. Second thing, just looking at this passage, that's key here is they preached what he preached. This is a phrase I've tried to hammer for you and make sure you catch. Preach the gospel of the kingdom. This is the message that John the Baptist was preaching when Jesus meets him clear at the beginning of the gospel. John is preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and Jesus comes and says, that's me. He gets baptized, and the Holy Spirit descends, and God says, this is my son, listen to him, affirms Jesus, and then Jesus takes the exact same message, the gospel of the kingdom, and begins preaching it. Because Jesus is the fulfillment of that message. We saw that in the Sermon on the Mount, which would be a long-form picture of what gospel of the kingdom preaching looks like, where Jesus says, I'm the fulfillment. All the law, all the piety of the Old Testament, all the practices, all the hopes, they point to me. I am the revelation of the justice and the grace of God fulfilling the law and bringing people into a relationship with the Father. If you want to hyper-summarize Sermon on the Mount, that'd be my real short. I fulfill the piety, I fulfill the justice. I am the grace of God fulfilling it and bringing people into a relationship with the Father. And so he says, I came to John and said I'm the fulfillment of that message. I've preached it and said I'm the fulfillment of that message. And I'm going to send you and you're going to preach me. So we preach Jesus. Their message is Jesus. This is one of my big burdens for biblical preaching in the church. Our mission is to preach Jesus. When I was in York with Iglesia Cristiana, we had a little plaque on the back of the podium that just said, Sir, we would see Jesus. So every time you got up to preach, that was a reminder. You have one job, preach Jesus. And this is hard because we can get on rabbit trails. I grew up in both the tradition and in my Bible college training that the duty of the church is to preach expository preaching, which is my preferred mode. That's why we've been in Matthew for a year, and we'll be in it for another year. So, I love me some expository preaching. But here's the thing. I don't have a verse in Scripture that commands expository preaching. I expository preached myself into a corner when I realized I couldn't expositorily defend expository preaching. I can logically defend it. Keeps me close to the authority of the Word and away from my own opinions. That's good for everybody. I can theologically defend it, and I can see some examples. There's at least one in Nehemiah. They opened the Word and it says they explained it verse by verse. It's not commanded, but there's at least an example. I'm not sharing this to pick on expository. I'm sharing it because I think a lot of you have the same heart as me. You deeply appreciate the priority of expository preaching. And I want to remind you that you should be more committed. Whatever your love of expository is, you should be more committed that preaching must reveal Jesus. That if I manage to go verse by verse and word for word, and I don't mention Jesus, I may have followed an example in Scripture, but I have violated the model and command of Jesus. All the Scriptures point to me, Jesus will say. I have sat in a service with the church where a passage was expositorily preached, and Jesus was not. We preached, and he was in the passage. We just bounced off of him as a good example of why we should be nice, why we should be kind, why we should be serving. It was a good civic message for Christmas with no Jesus. The form of your sermon will not redeem you if the content doesn't point to Jesus. They are sent, he says, preach the gospel of the kingdom. I'm the king, and the good news is here. Gospel is a royal proclamation. It's the idea that the king has come. So preach me and preach my kingdom. And I'm assuming they preach that more than one way. They may have preached it from different texts. Jesus will do that. He'll go to synagogues, open Isaiah, and say, so that's me. But he always points to him and the fulfillment of the scriptures in him, bringing people to the Father through grace. So in our mission as a church, if we want to be a church that joins Jesus, whether it's on a mission trip or on the work week or at the Ephrata Fair, we don't just want to talk to people about good stuff, being nicer people, kind stuff. And there's a lot of things that loving Jesus makes me care about in the world. That's good stuff, and there are even lost people who would agree that matters. But it's not enough to partner on good stuff and to talk about good stuff and help them be moral, good neighbors. I have an obligation to share Jesus with them. And I have not fulfilled my mission if I have not spoken about Jesus. You preach me. When you go out, here's your message, the gospel of the kingdom. You preach the king, you preach his kingdom. So they're defined by him in their practice, but they're also, their message is him, is centered on him. We want to be a people who always preach Jesus. And then the other piece I want to catch, everything they do in his authority. I know you look at it and the first thing you're like, wow, they healed all kinds of disease, they raised the dead. I want to do all that. And that's fine for you to want to do all that. I think Jesus can do whatever he wants still, and he still has all the power and all the authority. But that's like focusing on the flashy part and missing. They can't do a thing outside of the authority of Jesus. It doesn't say he gave them, the magic skills. He says he gave them authority. Jesus has that authority. And that's been a theme, right? The blind guys say, would you, Son of David, have mercy on us. And he says, do you believe that I can do this? And they say, yes, Lord. They affirm that Jesus has the authority to heal. When Jesus goes, your sins are forgiven, and they're like, he can't do that. And he says, yes, I can. And to prove it, I said it. And now get up and walk. He's proving that he has that authority. So we don't do miracles at our own whims. We don't even think we can hope for a miracle on our own strength and own wisdom. Jesus has the authority over this world to forgive sin, to heal disease, to break the power of sin and death. And we work under his authority. They don't do a single miracle till Jesus gives them the authority to do so. And so the principle here is our ministry is done in submission to Jesus. And if submission to Jesus means we heal somebody, we heal somebody. And if submission means we preach the gospel to somebody, we preach the gospel to somebody. Because it's his mission, and they don't go till the Lord of the harvest sends them. And so our biggest burden should be, Lord, show me your will. Father, would you direct me? Open doors before me, because I can do nothing apart from you. Give me your authority so that I can move and preach in power. Because this is your mission and your power. I'm just a channel. I'm just a vessel. And so that's, I think, why he sends them. He says, look for the people that I've already softened their heart. You're going to go and work where I'm working. Oswald Chamber phrased it well. He said, work out where you see God working in. As you look out, you see God at work somewhere, you just jump in there and join him in what he's doing. If it's his ministry and his authority, I'm just going, where do I see God at work? Let me jump in that. Let me get in on that. And so their ministry is submitted to Jesus. Now, a lot of different ways we can go into this. These are all, I would say, super practical. These shape how you pray and how you step out. Lord, would you send me? Lord, would you enable me? Help me see how you fit into this situation. Let me see how this finds its resolution and its salvation in you, because I want to preach you in this. I want to preach you in how I work well, and I want to preach you in how I reconcile relationships and family in neighborhoods and workplaces, because I'm not just looking to get along with people. I need to preach Jesus, and I need Jesus' authority if there's going to be anything powerful happening here. For us as a church, the real simple thing is this: the object of discipleship is Jesus. He didn't just train them to be apostles. The object of discipleship was not apostleship, even though they are right now becoming apostles. The object of discipleship was Jesus, and they're Jesus apostles. You might not be discipled to be an apostle, but you will be discipled to be like Jesus. And so all the parts and pieces, all the content of discipleship has to come together to form us into the likeness of Jesus. That until Christ be formed in you is Paul's prayer. The Corinthians have been asking tons of questions. And, the Galatians are off track, and he's writing these letters to these different churches, and he just says, my little children in whom I'm in the pains of anguish again until Christ be formed in you. He doesn't say, my little children who I really wish you were more like Paul. The birth he's waiting for is the birth of Jesus. And if he labors, he labors. If he disciples, he disciples to see people formed in the likeness of Jesus. And so we want a discipleship that is empowered by Jesus, that is defined by Jesus, and that preaches Jesus. And our goal in investing in us as a community is that every one of you becomes more like Jesus and becomes equipped and capable and enabled to reveal Jesus where you are as the part of the body he's made you to be. So we are going to be talking, we've talked in the past about these different parts. This is a hands-on moment for the disciples, but it's not just hands-on for hands-on's sake. It's hands-on to know Jesus. I talked to a fellow who said, I love discipleship, and it was all about just hands-on and teaching people how to have progress in their life, get better jobs. It was breaking chains of poverty. It was good stuff. But his discipleship wasn't about them learning Jesus. It was hands-on to learn business skills and financing and budgeting, which people need. But if I teach you to budget and don't teach you Jesus, that wasn't the hands-on of Jesus discipleship. It was just good teaching methods. That's why we say discipleship's not just concerned with actions, but thinking and values. But again, I could make thinking and values be just happy stuff. I teach you to be loving and gentle and kind. No, I wanted to teach you to have the heart of Jesus. I want to get past the service and take everything back to who is Jesus, what does he feel, what does he believe. And when we say delegated skills or demonstrators, because I want you to have a likeness of Jesus, a picture of Jesus that you are replicating, that you are following, that Jesus lived in your midst is the context in which you are discipled. And so when we say, like we did last week, that these fit together into a holistic transformation, the transformation, if it's biblical discipleship, is you becoming more like Jesus. This is not career advancement, self-help, or any other sort of training. This is a holistic process of people becoming like Jesus. And if we miss the object and have all the pieces, what a tragedy. Jesus is a master teacher. You can steal all his processes to do your own thing. But the call here is to preach the gospel of the kingdom in the manner of Jesus, which means we're going to make disciples. We're going to bring them in hands-on. We're going to model and share stuff, and we're going to talk hearts and values, but all of it in service to the big goal, till Christ be formed in you. So in our context, how do we take these things, do what Jesus did, preach what Jesus preached, be enabled by his authority, this idea of a hands-on discipleship that gets to heart and values? What does that mean for us at Christ House? I want to give some applications that we're going to try and flesh out as we go through the year. We have taken this as a mandate to rethink church membership. Church membership, in my experience, is usually not about discipleship in any way that we just talked about. Church membership is usually about a promise to tithe, attendance, and agreement with the doctrinal statement. I've been through a couple church membership classes, and generally if I attended a class and agreed to those baselines, church's doctrine is this, I'm cool with it. And then attendance and tithe was usually the only practical things asked of me. If I said yes and had been baptized at some point, good to go. what I see with Jesus doesn't look like that. In fact, when does he do that doctrinal statement talk with the disciples? They're already getting sent out, and he hasn't had the Jesus 101 class. Instead, he said, walk with me, hear me preach, and embrace this message. They're learning who is Jesus by walking with Jesus. And yes, there's a teaching part, but it's teaching and practice all together. And so we've got a couple books. There's going to be 5 in total. I say books, they're like 4 pages. 2 pages front and back, 8 mini pages, and half of it's cover art. So you can handle this. That are just going to walk through what we want to talk about as membership at Christ House. And we're trying to talk about membership more as inviting people into discipleship. We would like to be able to boldly say at Christ House, our membership is discipleship. It's not just checking a box. It's not just satisfying a bank's legal obligations for getting loans or something like that. And so the first thing, we want a membership that calls people to Jesus. If Jesus says, come follow me, then our membership has to say, come follow Jesus. And so the first thing we do with anyone who wants to come be a member is we talk about who is Jesus, and we invite them to begin seeking Jesus. And this is key. Not that they come and understand everything about Jesus, because these disciples of Jesus will say some dumb stuff about Jesus at various intervals. But a commitment to follow Jesus, an invitation to jump into a kind of community where you'll learn about him as we walk together. And so our first little booklet is just going, here's Jesus, and an invitation to follow. And even in there it says, here's what it would be to put your faith in him. But if you're not sure you're ready to do that, here's what it would be to say, I want to know you, Lord. Would you reveal yourself? Because I think if you're committed to chasing him here, even if you're not sure where you stand, you can be discipled. And I'd love to walk with you. And I hope this would be a place where being a part of this church calls people to meet Jesus and walk with him. And as they walk with him, I trust him to change them and to win them. So discipleship begins with a commitment, not necessarily a full doctrinal statement. But as you walk with Jesus, you are taught who he is and to embrace him. And so as we think this through, we start with the call, but then we start to have a structure of actually having a plan for us walking together and practicing faith together. And so we wanted a discipleship that creates a community of disciples. And so it's more framed by how you would plug into and participate. It's saying things like, we'd like you to pair up with somebody in the church to be an accountability partner to talk about your spiritual life. So you're actually sharing life together, not doing it solo, and growing together. We want to have a plan in the first stage to have people walking with you and watching teachings with you and doing spiritual disciplines with you, so that we grow and learn how to practice the faith together. And so you're experiencing and exploring Jesus with other believers sitting there talking to you. So you don't just get to the end of a class and have a diploma. You get to the end of a season and you have brothers and sisters who know you and know your faith. And then the plan fleshes out into those who have been called and who have embraced Jesus get commissioned, like we're at here in chapter 10, where they get their hands into the mix. So they should, I already hit on the biblical Jesus is that first phase. I'm pulling pages out of my book. Let's get the other page. There we go. It's about a commitment to a process rather than agreement to a statement. So I'm looking to see people plug into small groups so that we're hearing a message and then we're discussing that message. And then we're going and practicing that message together. So there's a process of you growing rather than just a head nod. Because you can head nod whether you mean it or not. You can head nod whether you understood or not. You might think you understood and didn't. But we get you out and we start living this faith together, we'll see where the rough edges are. And so my dream is a discipleship church where we actually practice our faith together and have brothers and sisters walking alongside us saying, I get that now. The light bulb went on here. Or what you were doing was what I was trying to do, and I can't do that. Can you explain to me how you do that thing? Because I want to share my faith more, or I want to be more gracious. I get the concept, but I need a process. I need to walk with somebody to be transformed. And so we're framing our membership as, here's a process we walk on together, and here's what that process looks like. So that we build a community that's centered on Jesus. At the heart of it is us knowing and becoming more like him. And it's something we don't do solo. You don't hear the message and go home and just apply it on your own. We want to find ways to apply together and be this community. I want us to be dependent. I want us to be hands-on. And so recognizing that's what I see Jesus do here, calling us to do, expecting us to do, we've tried to put that into membership and say membership are people who are committed to saying this is the place where, this is my home, this is my family, so this is where I do life. If I'm trying to figure out how to obey Jesus on something from his word, I'm going to do it with my family at my home. And this is my home, this is my family. So whether that's in small groups saying, hey, this is an area I struggle. It came up in the message today, that really hit me. I need to figure out how to do this more. Can someone do it with me? Someone be able to walk with me? Can we do this together so I can learn and be discipled? And so those are the structures. We do most of this now, but this is us codifying it and structuring it. So we have booklets. Chad said they'll be here at 6, so they'll be here in about 5 minutes. And we'll have them in the back. At least the first 2 of the 5 are already printed. I just want you to take them home and start reading over them. I want you to see this as our effort to try and flesh out how to intentionally do discipleship in our midst. I want you to see that when we say hands-on and apply the sermons, that we're sitting down, typing, printing, discussing. Group leaders and I have been talking about this document for over a year to try and have a faith we practice together in these ways. Because talk about discipleship's cheap. If discipleship's hands-on and community connected, then really you don't agree one bit if you don't actually walk out of here and actually connect with a person in how you try and apply it. So we want that to be our application as a church, but that doesn't negate tons more applications for you personally and in your groups. I do want to still give you some time to discuss. So bringing it all back, why make discipleship our membership? Why have this push to get people plugged into accountable relationships and small groups that are actually active and getting out there and doing stuff? Because Jesus sends us to take his message on his mission and his power. It's not enough that we just have a service and worship him, even though he's worthy of worship all day long. He has made an invitation and a command that we come be disciples and be sent out to take this message. And so for us, plural, Jesus sends us to take his message on his mission and his power. So here would be 2 questions for us to discuss this week as you chew on that. One, I'd like you to share some testimonies. I just have confidence that there have been people God has used already as models of discipleship in many of your lives. Maybe not all of you, but God in his grace raises up his saints, whether even they had a biblical definition of discipleship or not. The Holy Spirit prompts them to invest in these ways. So I would love to know, who are some people who helped you become more like Jesus? And how did you make space for them in your life? Because if they changed you, you spent some time with them. You somehow let that person be around you enough. I just would love to hear some of those stories. I'm hoping every group has a couple, because I think you'll see examples of what trying to be a discipleship community looks like in those interactions. And then 2, how can our group guard against losing Jesus and his mission as the center of all we do? I think plenty of churches drift from being Jesus the center to being our method is the center, our model is the center, our culture is the center. There's at its ugliest, it becomes just a very ethnocentric thing. But in very subtle ways, it can just be moralism. We want to make good people